Well, welcome. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I am so excited and humbled that you chose to spend some of your valuable time here with us. And today's going to be a really interesting conversation. I am looking forward to chatting today with Irma Velasquez, and we're talking about negotiating without words, lessons in intuition, silence, and neurodiverse communication. So, welcome, Irma. It's great to have you.
Hi, Cindy. How are you? Thank you for this opportunity. I
Yeah.
love to talk about communication.
Yeah, and especially I think it's people don't often have this particular conversation. So I'm looking forward to digging in. And for our listeners, today's episode is going to take us into one of the most profound and I think overlooked forms of negotiation, the kind that happens without language. And our guest, as I say, Irma Velasquez is the mother of a neurodiverse, non-speaking autistic son. And through him, she's learned, I guess you could say, an entirely different approach to communication, using intuition and connection. And Irma speaks about the power of silent negotiation and how navigating life with a child who communicates primarily through, energy and cues and presence has transformed not only her parenting, but the way she moves through the world. So why don't we dig in? Irma, in your message, you had mentioned that you've learned the power of silent negotiation, as I said in the intro, and in particular from your nonverbal son. So what does silent negotiation mean to you, and when did you first recognize it was happening?
Well, I remember a speech pathologist made a comment that made me stop and really think. When my son was first diagnosed, he was 3 or 4, and I was very eager to hear his words, hear him speak. I wanted to, because he did have a few words when he was about 18 months old, and
Okay,
then he started to lose them. And so I was really eager to hear that voice again. And
of
I
course.
said to the speech pathologist, when is he going to talk again? And she looked at me and she said, talking is not communication.
Yeah,
She said, you want him to communicate, you don't want
yeah,
him to talk. And that really changed the way that I approach connecting with him. It was about connection. After years later, I realized it's about connecting.
yeah,
It's not about talking.
yeah. And it's so important. And for our listeners, I really invite you and challenge you maybe to think about in your own life. I think in North America in particular, we're so conditioned to talk, talk, talk. We talk over people and we don't listen and we don't pay attention to other cues. And we miss so much of the communication sort of sphere. And I think it's one of the reasons the world is in such a divided, polarized place right now. And in fact, Irma, I think one of your talking points is how do you navigate life without seeing or hearing the signposts? And I thought that was such a beautiful image about picking up some of those cues. So what does navigation look like, in your world? And what has Aaron taught you about reading cues that most of us miss?
Well, the very first lesson, which I am so grateful to him and to many people, and also to my teacher, one of my teachers, is what listening starts within.
Yeah.
And if we don't listen to ourselves, and we hear this often, if you don't love yourselves, how can you love someone else? Well, if we don't listen to ourselves, how could we listen to another human being?
Yeah.
So it starts by listening to our bodies, to my body, to my inner world, to my sensations, to my thoughts, to my emotions. And that has been my work for 20 some years, is really
Yeah.
getting connected to myself, because I didn't realize that I was so disconnected. I wasn't listening to me.
Yeah.
So how could I listen to my son if he wasn't listening to me? So that's really what started an inquiry into self, a self-inquiry that goes on until this
Yeah.
moment, actually.
And I think we're all guilty of that. I would venture to say that most people, we don't really know ourselves because we don't hold that mirror up. We don't explore what motivates us or really think about our own, our triggers, our deepest desires, our deepest whys. We get so caught up in our to-do driven world that I think we miss the most important part. And I think tied to that, I know you also ask a lot, what does your mindset have to do with getting what you want? And I think that our mindset is partly about, listening to ourselves and negotiating with our inner self, if you will. So how's
Mm,
mindset shaped the way that you advocate, communicate,
mm.
negotiate for your son and beyond?
Well, I call it more of a worldview rather than a mindset, which is just another word, other words for. It's a worldview that has changed for me, and now the way I really approach this is a mindset that says the other person is somebody that I've just met. However long I've known, and I've been married 35 years and I still get into my husband, right? So that whoever who's sitting in front of me is a new person. That person is not the same yesterday as today, just as I
Yeah,
am. So that's my mindset. That's my one of my come froms is that I'm interested in finding out who is this human being in front of me. I want to know. I don't, and it's so hard for me, especially to not to make judgments, not to
yeah,
remember something they did, a year ago and say, oh, they're like this or they're like that.
yeah,
So to really stay present to what's here now is really the basis for my mindset and coming back. And I actually tell myself when my head goes spinning into all kinds of thoughts, it's like, come back, come back, come back to here, to this
yeah,
moment.
yeah.
This is the only thing we have.
I love that. That's beautiful. And we don't do it enough, right? We're sitting purportedly communicating with somebody and we're thinking about the next thing we want to say or thinking about what we've got to do that afternoon or all the other things that sort of clutter up our brain rather than
Mm.
allowing us to be fully present in that moment, in that interaction with somebody. And when I say mindset, I wonder maybe you characterize it differently, but even that sort of internal negotiation, like, how do I want to show up in this conversation? Who do I want to be? Negotiating with ourselves to get over our, limiting beliefs and fears. What are some thoughts you have on that?
Honestly, the word negotiation throws me off a little bit because it sounds, and this is a judgment.
Yeah,
I'll be honest, it's a bias that I have. It brings me back to the courtroom. It brings me back to that back and forth and give and take. You want something. So you're using the word differently, I gather. So I'm going to be curious
yeah,
about how you use the word. But so negotiation for me, if I change the word into just getting to know myself, inquiry.
yeah,
It's an inquiry and is understanding at this moment what I'm sensing, what am I feeling right now as I'm sitting here talking to Cindy. How am I, what's happening in my body,
yeah,
how am I sitting, am I grasping something, or where are my thoughts going?
yeah,
And then bring me back to, oh, here I am with
yeah,
Cindy, and you asking me about negotiating with myself. So I wanted to just go back to that word because that was in the back of my mind, and I
yeah,
wanted to bring it to the
yeah,
forefront to say it's sort of nudging at me, and
yeah.
it's creating an edge. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
just
and I
wanted
love that you called that out because to be honest, Irma, I mean, that for me, that was my epiphany moment. I'd been a lawyer for, many, many years, and I realized that our legal systems, our political systems, most of our businesses are set up based on a very old school, competitive, more what people would perceive as a masculine model, right? And it's funny because that's exactly where you went. And I usually start when I talk in a group to say, when I say the word negotiation, I bet you immediately think of a boardroom and power suits, right? And I'm trying to cause a shift by having people redefine what we think of as negotiation. So it takes that edge, I think was the word you used,
to.
out of it. And we start recognizing that all of life is a negotiation, right? We negotiate with our self every day. We negotiate with our loved ones, our intimate partner, our kids. We negotiate with suppliers. We negotiate or, sort of navigate, if you will, through this world. So taking the charge out so we get away from that power over kind of mentality and instead look at power with, at bringing empathy and connection and rapport building and trust into it so that we show up more intentionally in these potentially difficult or not difficult conversations, whether with our internal, with ourself or with others. So I definitely use the word negotiation intentionally with a view to having people rethink about it to maybe take that charge away, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it really made me think because you use it with feminine as well. Feminine negotiation. Oh, is there a masculine negotiation,
Yeah,
or is it? I take it as a communication and connectedness, which is what we do, well, in the courtroom too. I'm sure it
yeah,
happens. You want to connect with someone
absolutely.
to get to a place of resolution
Yeah,
and to get to a place with understanding and interconnectedness. So going back to your question about listening from a place of silence is really for me, that's where I want to get. I want to connect
Yeah.
with whether it's my son, my husband, my friends, the person that's doing my gardening, whoever it is.
Yeah.
It's there's that connection that I yearn for, and I think it's a human need that we have to
Yeah.
connect
Yeah.
with others, and we are already interconnected. There's no doubt about that. We're connected.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
communication, the work that I see is how do I authentically connect from that place of who I'm truly am? And to get to that place of who I am, there's that place of silence.
Yeah.
And then when that I reach that place of silence and quietness, I can connect with the other person's place of
Yeah.
silence and
Absolutely.
quietness, you know?
Well, and that's why I wanted to have you on because really, I mean, that is at the heart of, at least for me, the idea behind the art of feminine negotiation. And just when you said, is there a masculine one? Like, it's actually not gender based. I mean, we all have masculine and feminine energy, and we're getting away from those gender based terms, which is a good thing. But studies show that people still consider, like, I mean, I know there was one study done of 60,000 people around the world, and when they were presented with certain traits like rapport building, compassion, curiosity, the vast overwhelming majority considered those to be so-called feminine traits, whereas, aggressiveness or even assertiveness and strength, these were all traits that people associated as being a so-called masculine trait. So again, it's about breaking out of those precepts and just focusing on the human connection, which is exactly what you're talking about. And I love that when I asked you about that internal sort of, negotiation or whatever word, it seemed to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, I love that really it sounded like you were talking about just awareness and presence, right? That for you, that internal sort of negotiation, if you will, is about really allowing yourself to be aware and present in every moment. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a feminine, if you want to use that word feminine, I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Yeah.
There's that
Yeah.
receptivity and that expressiveness. You want to tie that one to the male energy. There's that give and take, that energy that we all
Yeah.
embody, and there's not one, the one is not better than the other,
Yes.
or there are many energies, but
Yeah.
ways to classify an energy. But that's what I really sense. And going back to my son, that's really what I why he's such a teacher. He still is. He's 32 years old now, and I learn from him every day. And he's nonverbal. He communicates through sounds, through gestures, and people get him. They
Yeah.
get him,
Yeah.
because there's a genuine, very real part of him. He doesn't care about social media, what he
Yeah.
wears. It's just there's a pureness to him
Yeah.
that comes through and serves as a mirror. And you use the word mirror, and part of communicating is really we're mirrors for each
Yeah.
other. And when we see ourselves in another,
Yeah.
we feel seen,
Yeah.
uh, without any expectations. And that's what I learned from my son, is that he just wants to be seen.
Yeah.
He wants to be himself,
Yeah.
and appreciated for who he is, which is
And
what we all
And
are.
don't we all? Absolutely. And the thing that I love about that, I think there's such a lesson there as well that with your son, with the nonverbal, people end up being forced to pay attention to the other stuff.
Mm,
And how different our connection would be, how different our communications would be if we made a point of doing that all the time, Don't
yes.
just listen to the words, pay attention to
Mm,
the expression, and because we often say things that aren't necessarily consistent with what we're feeling in the moment, whether it's hurt or whatever our
mm,
deepest desires are. And you've said that intuition is one of your most reliable tools, and I love that. It's part of my R fit model. The I is for intuition. And
mm.
what does intuitive negotiation look like? And again, just know when I say negotiation, I mean that broader.
Yeah.
You can substitute it for communication.
Mhm. No, no,
Um,
I can.
and what does that look like day to day as a parent of a neurodiverse child and beyond?
Yeah. Well, intuition for me is that place of the unknown. We get to a quiet space. Whenever I can meditate, I felt that this morning, meditating, being in a quiet place where there's a no go to, or there's no future, there's no past, there's just a moment of
Mm,
space.
yeah,
And then this something kicks in that says, you need to do something, there's some action here, whatever it is, get up and,
yeah,
go outside or take a breath, whatever that is. That to me is intuition without knowing the why, without just trusting that,
yes,
yeah, I need to get up and go and look to see where my dog is.
yeah,
There's just something that sparks it, but it's in a place of non-doing, in a
yeah,
place of without resolution. It's just there's a voice. I think people talk about the voice,
yeah,
they hear or they feel. And to me that's intuition.
yeah,
And I'm sure as a parent, we have that with our kids,
yes,
that intuitive hit that, oh, I wonder what's going on there. Something's going on. I don't know what, I
yeah,
don't know why, but I know something's going on. And there's that place in the body that we
yeah.
can sense into and follow to the next step.
Yeah. And I think it's so important that we talk about it and recognize it and think about it because I feel like, our ancestors, I think there was very strong intuition. And particularly if you look at First Nations groups and
Mm.
that, I mean, there was just powerful intuitions and connections as a result of it. And somewhere along the line, we let go of it and let go of it and let go of it. And I think so many people don't trust that intuition anymore. And whether, as you say, it's something as simple in that moment as saying, I need to go outside, or whether we're advocating medically for our child when the medical community is saying, no, nothing's wrong, everything's right, you're paranoid. And if you've got that little voice in your gut that's nagging
Mhm.
at you that something isn't right, to learn to trust it, I think it's so important.
Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful.
We want to our upbringing brings us to the point we have to have an answer for everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes we just need to sit with a question and allow that to be there. And
Yeah.
it's so uncomfortable. I find that's one of the most difficult things, just to sit with a question and not having to have an answer for it. And it could take minutes, or it could take days, or it could take hours. I had a situation with my son last year that was very, very difficult for me to sit with that question. And it has something happen with him in the middle of the year with a caregiver. And I knew I had to do something, but that intuitive hit,
Yeah.
I said, but this is not the right time. And I will know when the right time is. And it was about 6 months later that the right time came.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, if I didn't trust that, the response would have been very
Yeah.
different for him
Yeah.
and for me, and so it's that staying with that discomfort and really
Yeah.
trusting that sometimes everybody else is saying, well, why don't you do something?
Yeah.
Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And advice and
Yeah.
solutions. And that's easier to have a set next step. There's a poem by David White, the Welsh poet. I don't know if you know him, but
I don't.
there's this line there that I try to remember. He says, take the step that you don't want to take.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like that's the step that where it makes you pause and you take it anyway because something inside of you
Yeah.
is affirming that, and that's the trust of the intuitive
Yeah.
part.
And I think it's so important. It's interesting to me how you're connecting that intuition and trust, because I've long believed that the two work hand in hand, right? It's about trusting yourself, trusting your intuition. When we think about trust, we often think about just building trust with other people, but it's about building trust with ourselves, right? And knowing how to trust that intuition, which is so important. Now, I know autism advocates often talk about presuming competence, right? Which I think we miss the boat on often. So how has presuming competence in your son shaped your connection, your communication, and your choices, and how can it help our listeners in their lives as well?
Well, I'm not quite sure how other people take that, but the word presuming is something that tells me that it's not a real thing. Because if you assume something, I use the word, if I assume something, then it's my idea. It's not the truth because I'm not giving myself a chance to really see what's going on. So with my son, his growth has been and his evolution and maturity over the past 32 years has taken all different paths. And he continues to surprise me
Yeah.
on his brilliance. And
Yeah.
one of his caregivers says he's a genius. And I say, yeah, I know he's a genius. And at the same time, he's not, I shouldn't say this because I'm not totally sure. Crossing the street would make it by himself would give me a little bit of anxiety because I don't know
Yeah.
if he can cross a street with a lot of traffic
Yeah.
safely. You
Yeah.
know, I haven't tested it out, but I
Yeah.
don't know that part. So that's sort of presuming, I would be presuming competence with him if I would say, go ahead, cross the
Yeah.
street, you know, and putting him and myself in a very precarious situation. But so there's competencies that I know he has, and sometimes I don't trust
Yeah.
because of my own
Yeah.
beliefs
Yeah.
and or fears. A lot of it is fear. It's a lot of it's
Yeah.
protection, you know,
Absolutely.
control that
Yeah.
I don't want it. I love him so much. I want him to be safe.
Yeah.
So it's protecting myself, a lot of that.
Yeah.
So and that goes back to our the inner work, you know, that really, why am I making this decision at this point? Asking of myself, what's happening here for me that's getting in the way of knowing who he is
Yeah.
or understanding who he
Yeah.
is. So I think that if I could live that way every minute of my life,
Uh,
I would be a different person. But it's hard. It takes a lot of
yeah.
work to come back to ourselves and to not to let the distractions of everyday life and thoughts and emotions
Yeah.
get in the way.
But it's interesting, Irma, as you were talking about that, it recognized for me that it's all about that balance, right? And it goes way beyond what the discussion we were having about your relationship with your son, because as you were saying it, it strikes me we do that with ourselves as well, right? That idea about where do we draw the balance between presuming confidence in our own ability to do things or step into it, taking into account the fears, as you say, and the trust, and drawing the distinction between what are fears that may not be based in reality versus trusting, whether intuition or otherwise, that no, that would be a step too far, right, for us,
Yeah.
or our child. Or
Mhm.
now
Yeah.
you have such a gorgeous presence about you, and I imagine that parenting a child who communicates without words requires a different emotional bandwidth that you have to develop. And I wonder if you can share with us what you've learned about patience and presence and emotional regulation through this journey, because you just have, there's such a power in your sort of quiet presence.
Mhm. Well, thank you for reflecting that back. Well, I've been doing work with 20 or so years that it started really trying to understand who I am and I'm using the Enneagram as a vehicle, as a tool. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram, but
Yeah.
it's a a map for understanding why we do what we do. Why do our patterns keep showing up all
Yeah.
the time? And that has helped me a great deal in knowing why I make decisions and catching myself in the act and coming back and say, well, you know, being compassionate with myself and trying again and going back and having that
Yeah.
introspective practices that allow me to practice it over and over
Yeah.
again, not just with myself, but with in community. And I'm working with a group, mostly women, what we call the Deep Living Lab. And it's an organization that I started along with my teacher, Roxanne Howe Murphy, a number of years ago. And we practice presence. We practice catching ourselves in the act through different ways. We practice the art of deep listening, which is what we've been talking about,
Yeah.
deep listening. You know, how do you
Yeah.
listen? How do you listen deeply, not from a place of our ego that wants to get somewhere,
Yes.
but from really what is Cindy saying, really
Yeah.
saying? And that's what Aaron has taught me is like, what is he really trying to tell me
Yeah.
at this point? Why is he pointing at the refrigerator over and over? You know, I would assume, oh, he's hungry, he wants something from it. He could be pointing at the color,
Yeah.
you know, at the shininess, at the a letter. There's so much that could happen in one gesture,
Yeah.
and we make assumptions because of our past or
Yes.
because what we want in the future,
Yeah.
and we need to come to the present moment because every moment is unique.
And we project onto others our expectations. As you were saying that about Aaron in the refrigerator, I'm thinking, gee, it could mean, maybe the fridge isn't working, the power's out, right? We
Yes.
immediately project our own assumptions on. And for our listeners, I want to circle back there to something Irma was just saying about listening, because I think most people, when they think of that word negotiate, right, they think about speaking more effectively. But I think Irma's reflecting so beautifully to us that negotiation can and should be about listening more effectively, right? And what deep listening really can mean, that impact. Now, I know you talk sometimes about 3 ways to access the power of silence, Irma. Can you walk us through that?
Yes. The first one is taking a breath, and those 3 ways could change, but for right now, what's
Yeah,
coming up for me is first taking a breath. And what that does is creates a pause. It creates a pause and some distance between what was in my mind and what is here now.
yeah,
So it gives me a little bit of space. So one of the things I try to do in meetings is to start with a pause, even if it's 1 minute or 30 seconds, that the power of a pause is huge.
yes,
And the breath is there all the time for us. So let's use it. So the breathing, pausing, and then checking in with myself. And it doesn't take that long. It
no,
could take just like that. Just checking in with myself. What am I feeling? What am I sensing? Oh, where are my thoughts? Where am I going? Am I trying to predict something, or am I trying to say something clever?
yeah,
Or, it's all these things that go in our minds. In instant, we can have thousands of thoughts going through. So taking a breath, pausing, and checking in with myself.
yeah,
And just that alone creates a different energy, whether it's with, I'm drawing or painting or creating something, or with another individual.
yeah,
And it's amazing how it's felt by
yeah,
the other. It's felt in the field. It's
yeah,
it's it actually, it's not a thought, it's not a concept. It's a real
yeah,
and an energetic hit that
yeah,
you're creating a different
yeah,
energy field.
yeah,
And that I've been trusting that more and more lately, because I can sense that in others, that when I'm present
yes,
and people are different. And
yeah,
when I'm all riled up, and whether I look when I look quiet outside, it really isn't. It's
yeah.
how I am inside. How am I being? And it really is a game changer.
Yeah. And I imagine for you and for others, because I feel like a calming just being in your presence, even it
Mm,
allows me to immediately sort of stop and pause and reflect. And in
mm,
addition, for our listeners, to what Irma's saying, the other beauty of it is not only that internal balancing, if you will, and in conjunction with that energy that it creates, it also creates space for you to perhaps be less reactive. I think when we don't allow that power of that pause, that breath, that moment, we have a tendency to get into reactive mode. And I think and again, I challenge all of you to think of a time in your life when you reacted immediately without allowing the power of that pause, and you said something you wish you could take back, or whether
mm.
in your intimate relationship or with your kids or in the business setting. So I really invite you to take that to heart. And Irma, I wonder, what would you say to parents who are terrified of getting it wrong, right? I'm sure some of our listeners are out there going, but what if I miss the cues, miss the needs? I'm not sure how to make that connection. So what advice do you have for them?
Well, I would say that that's very natural for us as human beings to not want to make mistakes, and especially with our children. And you don't have that feedback of you haven't created with in a relationship that reciprocity or the back and forth. I would just say trust yourself. To really trust that what you need to do in that moment is what you need to do.
Yeah,
And sometimes down the line, you go back years later, or a month or hours later, and say, oh, wow, that's why I did what I did.
yeah,
And if you make decisions or you step into a situation from the place of trust, you can't go wrong.
yeah,
You may never know why you
yeah,
did what you did. And I think that that's our thing. We want to know
yeah,
exactly, why did I do that? That makes sense. But sometimes we don't know, but that's what needed to be done. And it comes from the place of trust,
yeah.
it's the right decision. So,
Strong advice, solid advice. Now, I'm curious because we chatted earlier. I was saying about how I'm sort of trying to reshape our understanding of negotiation and how we define power or how we define success for that matter. And I wonder if like advocating for your son, throughout his life, has that reshaped your understanding of negotiation and power at all? And if so, how?
well, one of the things that I'm sitting with right now, it's been with me for a long time, is, Aaron is our only child, and my husband and I are in our 70s, and eventually we're not going to be around. He's probably going to outlive us, and he's a a healthy young man. So what's going to happen to him? Who's going to be around
Yeah.
with him when we're gone? So it's that, that question has been with me, even though he has wonderful caregivers and family friends. There's that doubt and that fear
Yeah.
of control. If I'm the caregiver, a primary caregiver, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And and that's a place of trust again. A place of trust. Not that, we don't prepare all the practical things and trust and all of that and housing and caregiving, that's done. But deep inside is that fear of, oh, who's going to be his mom if I'm not the one, and that comes back to trusting in him
Yeah.
as his own capacities. He has his own capacities as well,
Yeah.
and in myself, and so it's going back to trust. It all
Yeah.
comes back to trusting a bigger power.
Yeah.
You said the word power. I think we use it in so many ways that can be damaging to us. But
Yes.
I do believe that there is a bigger power, however
Yeah.
we want to call it,
Yeah.
that
Oh.
is holding us all.
Oh, I love that you went there. I read that, and I'd forgotten because it was quite some time ago. I wrote a piece about power, and
Mhm.
we always think about that power meaning sort of control, over others. Whereas, what about the power of the pause? What about the power of connection? What about, the power of trust? All of these kind of things that you've talked about so eloquently. Well, this has been a lovely conversation with some fabulous takeaways. And I normally like to end by asking, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? And it doesn't have to be about anything that we've talked about, just one of those moments that's been kind of an aha for you that changed how you show up.
There's quite a few, but I think I may have mentioned this already, that my presence matters.
Yeah.
That may not know why or how I touch other people, but my presence matters, and that has changed my mind shift.
Yeah. Oh, I love that answer because your answers are always so thoughtful. I don't know if it's intended, but there's so many ripples to them, Irma, right? Like you're talking about like your presence in terms of how you show up, but also I love that you consider how that presence impacts other people because clearly it does. I think that's gorgeous. So where can
Yeah.
people learn more about you?
Well, they can learn more about it in my website, irmavelasquez.com. Also, through deeplivinglab.org is another organization that I'm very much involved with, and the work that I do is through this group that promotes presence and being here in the now.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. And for our listeners, I'll make sure to put those in the show notes. So as always, don't panic if you're doing something right now where you can't get that down. We'll make sure to have that there. And I'm intrigued about that group that you've started. I'm definitely going to take a look at it myself. And for our listeners, I encourage you to do so as well. So again, Irma, thank you for spending time with us and sharing your gorgeous presence and inspiring
Mhm.
us to get a little more intentional about our own presence. So thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. That was lovely.
Yes, and for our listeners, I have no doubt there is so much value in this episode. And, as I sometimes say, I encourage you to re-listen to the episode as well, because there are a lot of layers here that if you apply in your own life, I think you'll be very surprised about the profound ripples that would come from that. And thank you, as always, for sharing this space with us. And if this episode resonated, please make sure to subscribe if you haven't done that already and share, give the gift of sharing. I'm a big advocate of that as well. Share this episode with people who you think can get some benefit and some value and maybe even need a reminder that they're not alone. And if you're ready to deepen your own negotiation power, rooted in empathy and curiosity and courage, then come find me at artoffemininenegotiation.com. And until next time, lead with heart, listen deeply, and renegotiate the stories that no longer serve you. Until next time, take care.